Now, studies in adolescent psychology link this behavior to what is called imaginary audience effect, where people believe they're constantly being watched or evaluated. This is not new, but social media has supercharged the interest. Now, our guest for the evening, Julie Ann Hoss, a clinical therapist and coach who helps people reconnect to reality one unfiltered moment after the other, joins us this evening, and we're going to be looking at whether MCS is simply a social trend or it is a sign of emotional disconnection. Where's the line between healthy self expression and self absorption? And how can we reclaim relationships, empathy, and our true selves in a scroll happy world of performative living? Julianne, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Welcome to Heartlines.
Thank you so much for having me. And I love the topic, by the way, because one of my best friends always tells me, Jules, remember,
Yeah.
we're all suffering from main character syndrome. So I'm sending greetings to Ranso. I hope he listens.
Julianne, you know what's really interesting is that this started off as an energy. Not too long ago, we were talking about main character energy, right? I am the narrator of my story. I am taking charge of my life. And that was the narrative around main character energy. I'm not going to allow things to happen to me. I'm going to curate my experiences to the best of my abilities. When did it become a syndrome?
It's actually so interesting because what you're saying, it's somehow still very connected and hand in hand. Because the idea that I'm a main character is the idea that I can take control. But what we currently experience in society is the idea that you have to take control. You must. And with that, it can quickly become a syndrome. And it's interesting because you were asking if it's like a social phenomenon. And for me, how I see it, I think it's a societal phenomenon. Because technically, if we look how society is structured now, what a lot of my clients struggle with, and they often feel ashamed that they struggle with it, is this idea that you can be anything if you're just good enough. So the only thing that's between you and you being a billionaire or a success is just you. The doors are open, the opportunities are there. And then a lot of people feel overwhelmed because now the idea is you have control, you can achieve everything, and that's how you've become the project of your own life. There's a beautiful book called The Burnout Society, and the author is Byung-Jung Han, and he describes this idea that our society is now an achievement society. So everyone is their own project. You have to use every minute, every second as productive as you can to be as successful as possible, and you are the main character. And that's why I think we also perceive it so much around us. And we have this feeling that everyone is a narcissist now because society kind of tells us that's how you need to be in the modern world. You have to be successful. You have to make money. You have to grab every opportunity. You have to better yourself with every second that you have in the day. And that's when it becomes a syndrome.
Julianne, what's interesting is that you're making mention of day to day efforts, right? When you are describing the idea of the syndrome, this specific syndrome, this is what people aspire to achieve. I want to be successful. I want every
Yes.
minute of every day of my whole life to count. And so if you're telling me that the syndrome is a problem when I see it as success, how do we then begin to detach and perhaps create a healthy understanding of how it is we're meant to live life, how it is we're meant to tell our own stories?
Yeah, and that's very interesting because when you become your own story and you want to control it, that's when it can flip into an unhealthy pattern because technically you are not in control all the time the way you want it. And if we want to tell a healthy story, it's always in connection. It's always in relation to other. You were asking earlier, how do we move away from this idea that I'm the main character, meaning I'm on stage and all the spotlights are on me, basically, again, to a healthy form of relationship. And I think what's important, and I mean, I love Dr. Sue Johnson because she's the founder of emotional focus therapy, which I use in couples therapy. But she has really unpacked it. When is it a healthy attachment and when is it an unhealthy attachment? When is it love or even self-love? And when is it more main character syndrome or more like a narcissistic way? And what we can find is for us to be healthy again in telling our stories is to be in relation to us, in relation to others, and in relation to the world. So with ourselves, this means that I'm honest with myself. I'm humble. I take accountability. I look in the mirror in the morning and I say, you know what? I'm here as a friend. I support you through the day. How can we give our best? And not, wow, you're perfect. You're the best thing that the world has existed. This idea of self-love for me also it's a bit too much because it praises a person. And my good friend that I studied with always said there are two ways that you can dehumanize a person. You can either degrade them or you put them on a pedestal. So if you put yourself on a pedestal, it's also not a healthy relationship. And how we relate to others, what you can see when you have main character syndrome, you're making it all about yourself and you're not offering your own emotions or vulnerability in the relationship. And that's when the other person feels, and this can be a friend, a work colleague, a romantic relationship, that they're not getting through to you. They have no meaningful way or no way to meaningful contribute to the relationship. And how that shows is that, for example, if you say something, I said to a friend recently, you know what, it's hard. I was ending a work relationship or a job. And I was like, it's hard. It feels like the last day feels heavy. And instead of like talking to me about this, he goes off and tells me about 5, 10 years ago when he ended a job and how the whole story unfolded. Or an old colleague, I tell him about like the new ideas or passion I have about the gym. He went literally back to 2016, and bet you not, that was only 2 years ago, when he was last in the gym to tell me about his story about the gym. So you see now, what I'm saying is a conversational relationship is we playing the ball back and forth. And I think sometimes it feels like that a person just grabs the ball and holds it. Or sometimes it feels like they're throwing balls at you and you have no chance to to catch it. And Eric Berner is a beautiful therapist, also looking at or like translational analysis. And he always says a relationship is like playing tennis. It's the back and forth. And I think that's what we're missing if someone is main character syndrome, because it's all about me, all balls to me, and I throw them back the way I want. So when we want to be in healthy relationships again, we have to play the ball back and forth. So it means when you play the ball, and then I technically have to repeat it, show empathy, understand what you just played to me, and then play it back in a helpful way. And there's like the idea of imago therapy, which is also very closely linked. And actually, when I looked it up, it's the same theories that come from this idea that relationships is like playing tennis. So really being in interaction again is the healthy response to it.
So, Julianne, quite a bit was shared there. Different kinds of therapy, theories you shared, just concerning this interactive state between two people in a relationship, right? But we don't always have the opportunity to identify this particular syndrome, this main character syndrome, if you will, in relationship, because it starts off on a different sphere. It starts off as you by yourself, right? And you feeling the need to ensure that your narrative is not, if you will, dimmed or dulled. And that's what I feel like the premise of the syndrome is that you don't want your story not to shine. You don't want your life not to matter, right?
Yeah.
And so let's talk about how this particular syndrome is different from narcissism. Because as you're describing, I'm like, isn't that narcissism? Isn't that part of the narcissistic trait range?
So there are similarities. I think how it's different is that main character syndrome, for me, it's more a societal phenomenon. So I think we all show it. It's a result of what is required of us in society and the pressures we have to make our stories count, to turn it into a project. And I think there are overlaps with narcissism because you can find in narcissism as well that this is these grandiose ideas of how I am or who I am, and also really wanting to matter and feeling special, unique, having that need for attention. But what's interesting is whenever we have this idea of main character syndrome, and the same actually applies to people who struggle with narcissism, it's in essence a need or a longing to be seen. So the difference, I think, is that when we speak of narcissism, it goes through all parts of your life and it's also just very consistent. And you would find in all situations that other people feel like they can't really contribute to relationships with you. And also, you'll find that there's a tendency to have a lack of empathy, even though what we sometimes see people describing as narcissism is actually more malignant narcissism. This whole manipulation or antisocial part is actually only a small part when we speak about narcissism from a clinical way. But the difference is, if it's like narcissism, if it's a personality disorder, you find it in all parts of life. People can't shake it off and also can't transcend it. Whereas if it's main character syndrome, it can show up, but it doesn't mean it shapes all of the relationships. It shapes every moment that the person has, and people might be more willing to reflect on it, and also they can still have meaningful relationships, but they suffer, like all of our relationships suffer in modern world, because we're full of ourselves, I guess. But what's so interesting is actually it is a cry for attention. It is still a cry to connect, but because we think I'm connecting by making my story count, by putting myself out there as being interesting, being fascinating, being something people look up to, I never find the connection I long for. Because the people around me want to be with me. They want to play tennis with me. But I think they need to want me. They need to desire me. They need to see me as a star on stage. So I get lonely if I have main character syndrome without understanding why. And that's why the flip side of that is that you would start feeling lonely and you would start feeling what's actually wrong. And you would feel like, am I not good enough? And that's why the other side of the coin of main character syndrome is this idea that you need to be perfect. Your story needs to count. You need to do everything perfect. You need to shine at all times. And that can flip very quickly into feeling flawed, into feeling not good enough, into doubting ourselves. And if we look at it more on a clinical level, let's say again, narcissism has similarities, but it's the more extreme version. It's the clinical version. It's in all parts of life. Take a guess. What's the mental health illness that is connected to narcissism or most connected to it? It's actually depression, because the person like ends up being so lonely, feeling so isolated and feeling so utterly undervalued, because I put my story out there, I think it should matter, but people don't want to relate to it anymore. They don't want to relate to me anymore because the connection is gone. And that's when it flips into feeling a victim, feeling like everything is happening to me, the world is a bad place, everyone is against me. So you see, it's those two sides. You have main character syndrome, longing for attention, longing for connection, longing to be seen. But the end result is that you don't feel like that. You feel disconnected and you doubt yourself. And that's what we need to realize to be interested in deep, proper relationships again.
The voice of Julie Ann Hoss, a clinical therapist and coach who helps people reconnect to reality, one unfiltered moment at a time. And what such a moment is this evening as we unpack the theory of main character syndrome, a digital age ego shift where we center our own narratives, sometimes at the expense of reality, empathy, and others. Send through your questions. Find us on WhatsApp, +27 6340 69126. Again, Julianne, you brought in some very interesting points, just talking about the experience of loneliness, the need for perfection, dipping into depression, and sort of making the world this bad place, and you're now to an extent the hero that is burdened with all that weight.
Yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, that sounds like covert narcissism as well, if I'm not to push the boundary there. But I don't want us to get into that field. I want us to talk about imaginary audience. Now, the concept
Mhm.
of imaginary audience is one that was studied, and usually the focal point would be adolescent psychology. I want to understand how it links well to MCS.
I'm actually smiling because I have to remember a situation where my friend felt that a colleague had main character syndrome. And the colleague had a birthday celebration, and he didn't speak of guests. He said he has 50 participants. Like he said, he has an audience at his birthday. So
Wow.
that's how it can actually turn into that. So that's why I'm smiling, because we were still like, okay, you have a birthday with an audience of 50 people. But I think it's that imaginary idea that people are watching us and they are looking at us. And that is something that, like you said earlier, obviously it's heightened through social media. It's this idea that I'm in the spotlight and my narrative matters, what I do matter. But it can also actually be really stressful, because if you always think people are watching you, you technically also feel they are judging you the whole time. So it can also collapse into anxiety or even imposter. And I think that's what we see with a lot of young people, and actually with ourselves. Because usually what upsets us with adolescents is a behavior we show that they repeat, and then we look at it and think, what are you doing? So I know it with myself also. One moment, even on social media, you this star, you're in love with yourself, and the next moment you're so anxious what people will think about you. And that's why when I work with people on these ideas of main character syndrome, which is linked to anxiety or imposter, I always say, you know what? Let's learn how to focus on the task again. Because if you always think there's this imaginary audience looking at you, you also centered around yourself. And people even do that. We do that at work even. You know how often at work when you go into a meeting, you're not thinking about the meeting, you're thinking about actually creating a good impression. Suddenly the other meeting participants are not meeting participants there, and your audience. Your colleagues become
Mm.
your audience, your clients become your audience, and it's about you. So I think we really have to learn to decenter our ego again and focus on the task at hand. But I don't think that is something wrong with people. I think that's just the dynamics we find in society. And that's why we also see it being heightened by social media. And what I think is so interesting when we think about main character syndrome, it's not just people trying to be extra amazing and extra perfect, it's also sometimes this heightened sense of responsibility. If there's a problem, I think I need to jump in and fix it. I don't think anyone else can do it. So it can come from a really good place. It can come from a really good heart. People want to take responsibility, but what they forget is that now you're helping because you're making it about your need to be helpful, not about the situation of the other person. So it's often the best intention in the world that brings out this feeling in other people that they don't feel seen. And you can often see it when people share a problem and the other person starts preaching with ideas. Say, for example, you say, "Oh, I had a challenge at work," and the other person will not stop talking at you what you could have done better. And you walk out of the situation and you feel like, I don't feel seen, but the other person meant well. So main character syndrome, don't look at it as something that people do just being super selfish and self-absorbed. Often it is this idea that I want to be good, I want to take responsibility, I want to take control, and that's where it links to what you said earlier. This idea that I want to take charge, I want to take accountability. But at the end of the day, we need to come together and see ourselves as part of a system, not as the only person who can fix it.
Julianne, this conversation is tilting into a different kind of conversation. And I say this because when we started, we almost, we were close enough to sort of demonizing main character syndrome, right? but we're slowly shying away from that concept and now looking at it as a trait that is intrinsic of human beings but lacks balance. You
Mm.
spoke about how self esteem issues sort of take, uh, if you will, become a product of main character syndrome. I want to know if self esteem issues initiate the issue or they are a product of what the person is experiencing. Is it, I was okay, then I fell prey to this overdose of consumption on social media, watching other people become the main character. Then I started training and trying to become the main character. Then I fell prey to self esteem issues and anxiety and depression and what have you. Or is it that I'm depressed? I'm anxious consistently and I suffer from anxiety. And this has become the narrative that I now take.
So definitely reinforces each other, but I would see the starting point in a changing economic and societal system where suddenly your currency was your value at your contribution. In like the past, often you had a certain role, you had a certain title, you had a job that you would complete. If you were a peasant, that was your job. You weren't looking to become a senior vice president. Like you just completed, and in the evening you were okay, you were done. Now, then your identity was also your role or your title. That brought with it completely different problems that I don't want to touch on. But what we saw now is the change of the society or the economy more into a neoliberal capitalist system where you are the value add. You only as good as what you can give. You're only as good as how you can improve yourself. So I believe that we started raising our kids in line with that thinking. And that's why I see a lot of people in my environment in therapy, and I also look at myself, where we technically feel I'm only as good as what I can do and offer the world today. So it's this idea that we've become our own masters, pushing ourselves to do more and more and more and work harder and harder and harder, not to feel guilty because we think I'm only what I can offer, I'm only what I can do, I'm only the value I can add. And that essentially results into self-esteem issues because if something goes wrong, if you feel you have a bad day, if maybe you have a bad year or you're sick or you're not succeeding as you should, and bet you not for every person who succeeds on social media or in our society, there is like 100 or even more who are not given the same platform opportunities. So it's like we kind of void those feelings. So essentially, it will lead to self-esteem issues because if you feel I am not doing, giving, contributing enough, I'm a nobody. You will have self-esteem issues. So I think that's where it all started. And that's why I think we're all more products also of that shift in society and how we're raised. And that's why I think the idea is not to put the finger or show the finger and make turn it into a blame game. Who's the bigger main character? Who's the bigger narcissist or what? But to see what are the demands in society doing to us, and how can we respond to that so that we all feel better together again. So I think that's the start. Then comes this pressure to be perfect because perfectionism is essentially the fear of not being good enough or the fear of making a mistake. It's not actually the desire to turn everything to a perfect piece of work. It's
Yeah.
actually the fear of making a mistake. And from there comes a low self esteem. And that's when things like depression and anxiety kick in. That's how I would explain it.
The voice of psychology therapist and coach Julie Ann joining us this evening. And we are looking at main character syndrome. Again, I want to urge you to send through your commentary, finding us on YouTube because we are currently streaming live. Channel Africa is the platform, and you should see a green highlight on if you will, I want to say profile picture, but that's not the right word. Listen, the picture that lets you know that you're heading over to the platform, right? So, sort of serving as a profile picture. You'll see a pink highlight with that live sign, and you head over to that. Just click on that, head over to the live stream, and send through your commentary on the tab where you can type as we continue conversations with Julie. And for now, we take a quick breather.
Conversations that touch the soul on Channel Africa.
It is 10 minutes after 11 p.m. Central African time. If you have just joined us, we're currently in conversation with psychology therapist and coach Julie Ann Hoss, and we're talking about main character syndrome. This is the pop psychology term that may sound playful, but hides serious questions about identity, emotional maturity, and the digital shaping of our minds. We've gotten through the very first bit, giving definition, of course, to MCS, looking at how it affects us and our well being. And I want to move into the impact that social media has, if you will, the creation of how we think, the fabricating or the curating of how we begin to think as individuals because of the content we consume, rather. So, Julianne, I want to step into how algorithm and algorithm validation, such as likes and shares, reinforces main character thinking, right? Because we hop onto social media, I post a post about me doing whatever, and 2 million people agree with me through a like, and 400 people sort of enjoy what it is I've put out, or maybe don't even enjoy it. But I'm seeing this constant interaction that leads back to what you were saying about connectivity and the longing for connectivity. And so, how does social media play its part in this entire ecosystem?
Yeah, the currency is attention. And you know, where you can see even main character syndrome. Have you ever looked at the photos people post on social media? And have you ever tried to compare how they look on the photo compared to their friends? It always shocks
Oh.
me the willingness of the photos people are willing to put out there about their friends, because I'm looking at the picture and I'm always thinking to myself, did you check if your friends are looking good on the photo? And then sometimes I feel, no, you actually didn't. You put it out as a main character photo. You looked at yourself, you liked yourself on the photo, and 2 seconds later, it was on Instagram. And the currency is attention, but the lifetime of it is so limited. You wake up in the morning, and whereas I think the generation I spoke earlier about, the generation that was raised to go out and do and add value, looks for affirmation the whole day that, yes, you're good enough. Yes, you've contributed enough. Yes, you added value. I say it's like a treasure box that you're trying to fill the treasure the whole day. Next day you wake up, it's empty again. And the more time we spend on social media, then, and that also applies now to the older generations because we all spend a lot of time there, the more we're looking for attention, even more than affirmation. So we wake up in the morning and we want to feel seen. And it is the primary need of us people to feel seen and to feel acknowledged. It's just that the challenges on social media, you're not really acknowledged for who you are. You're acknowledged for the narrative that you put out there about yourself. So it never fills your cup of feeling accepted. It's pretentious attention of thinking you're good enough, but then it doesn't last. You wake up with the treasure box empty and you have to re-seek it and create a new narrative. And because we feel the more attention we get depends on the better we're able to present a great narrative of ourselves. So if I put out things that other people will enjoy, the audience will affirm that this idea that others perceive me, they look at me, and if they will like it, I get more likes. So I adjust my narrative to what others want to see. And then technically, the more I do it, the less I feel accepted. So while I'm pushing on social media to get that attention and acceptance, I get less of it because I feel, oh, people actually only like the story about myself and not the real me. And that's where it can leave us very, very, very empty. And at the same time, it has a little bit of like a dopamine rush. So that's why it also, I think we all know it, it gets a bit addictive as well, right? Social media. So the more we want it, the more dopamine it gives us, the more we look for it, but also the emptier it feels us, the more it lures us back in. And that can become a little bit of a challenge because we're now trying to race for something we don't even know how it feels if we would get it anymore. And that's the challenge with social media. You put out more narratives and content, you're seeking attention more and more and more, but you're left with feeling even less accepted.
Well, Julianne, that's a bit of an interesting take. I would assume that if you are, in your own view, one of the most popular humans on social media, that you would feel accepted, you would feel desired, you would feel as though you have the authority and the attention and the connections you so desire. So I'm trying to understand now. How do you get to this place where you don't feel accepted?
So the challenge is that you feel you will be accepted if you put out great things, if you do great things, and if you convince yourself and others that you're great. But the challenge with that is that you always need the sense that I'm doing and giving enough. So the idea that people have is often that if I achieve this, if I get that much attention, if I reach that milestone, then I will feel good enough. But what they actually realize is that that moment never comes because you still live with the feeling that you need to achieve something, you need to do something, you need to get attention to feel good enough. So it becomes a race without a finishing line. So even though others will see you as well accomplished, you still live with that sense of, but it could stop any moment. And that is the challenge, but it's an isolating experience because if you've built your narrative on being amazing and being great and loving yourself and having that main character syndrome, you can't tell others that actually I'm feeling a little bit stressed and empty and not really accepted today because and that's also another differentiation that a lot of therapists make, like for example Dr. Sue Johnson, or also I love the work of Bell Hooks, and she also says that that's also the difference technically, that an unhealthy relationship, which is more the main character type of approach, doesn't allow for vulnerability. You show yourself as being amazing and successful. So you can't really say that I'm struggling today. You can't really say I feel unaccepted. And that's that emotional immaturity that you also touched on earlier. And that's why it becomes an isolating experience, but also a self fulfilling prophecy because no one will ever see that you're struggling. So no one can ever really affirm you on that level. Everyone thinks you're fine. Everyone thinks you're successful. You're the main character. You ought to be successful. You ought to be great. And that's why it can be a lonely feeling also.
Julianne, here comes a paradox. If we are constantly pushing out content that says that we are great, fantastic, amazing, achieving everything we want to achieve in our lives, then we can't ask for help. If we can't ask for help, we continue to perpetuate narratives that are not true, creating this cycle of content that's being put out. But on the other front, they are individuals. And I do think that this is directly affiliated with covert narcissism, where you are the subtle hero of the story. And so the problem is continuously present, which is I'm going through this. And we then perceive it as vulnerability, whereas that too is a problem, right? I'm going through this. This is my narrative. This is my story, but I'm hanging 10. I'll be strong. And so, how do we create a divide? How do we create a balance? Because it almost feels like everything we touch isn't necessarily being touched the right way. I don't want to say that we're doing it wrong. I think there is a balance that we're missing out on, and there is an opportunity for us to learn. So, help us create that balance.
So you said earlier people don't really see it, né?
Yes,
When it
yes.
starts. But I think people feel it. I think people actually feel if we are in a back and forth, if we're in a relationship, if we're playing the ball back and forth, or if the ball keeps on circling around you and keeps on going back to you. The challenge is just, I think people feel it, but a lot of us have been trained not to trust our intuition. I'm reading the book Running with the Wolves at the moment. It's also beautiful, this idea of the wild woman and how we are taught not to trust anything inside us. So often we think, no, man, my intuition can't be right here. or often we feel it in a little bit of a sense of being unsettled in a relationship, working relationship, friendship, or so forth, or feeling a little bit anxious. And then, but we think, oh no, we don't give it much attention. But I think people feel it. And if we ask ourselves, what is my body telling me here? Then we can also pinpoint it. And then we can realize, no, we're not in a back and forth. I don't really feel seen. And then technically we can bring it up and see if the other person is able to respond to it and is able to say, oh, that's not my intention. That I wish for a different type of friendship or relationship. And then we can see what we can do with it and if there is a way for us to come back and feel like we're in this back and forth. So I think, yes, when you're trying to overanalyze it, it's hard to find the right words. It's hard to pinpoint it. Everything gets a little bit blurry with all of the concepts, especially with so much information out there. But if you
Yeah.
take a step back and say, how do I feel in this person's presence? How affirmed do I feel? How affirmed do they feel with me? And how much do we actually have the third party, which is our friendship, our working relationship, our romantic relationship? Then you get a better sense of where you're at.
Julianne, this seems to affect relationships, and more often than not, we focus on these outward relationships, the romantic, the friendship, the work, the colleague. You have it, yeah? You name it. We talk about everything around us. But I want to find out, can this syndrome affect your relationship with you, such that there's an inward complexity that isn't
No,
being
no,
addressed?
no, you have to re, replace the can with it definitely affects the relationship with you. Because if you prioritize this idea of ambition, of your image, and of control, you prioritize attention over a really deep attachment. You prioritize this idea that I want to be seen, this false sense of who I am, over really connecting with yourself. You also rejecting all of the parts of yourself that don't fit into that image. So you only want and connect with the parts of you that actually fit to your narrative of who you want to be, and you have to reject the others. And that's a very, very sad reality of how you relate to yourself, with this idea that I need to put out a main character that will be accepted, that will be affirmed, that will get attention. But for that, I have to hide certain parts about myself. And that's why I always say self love for me is not waking up in the morning, looking into the mirror and say, yeah, Julia, you're the best thing that the world has ever seen. No, no, no. It's actually to say, I take you, I accept you with the ups and downs that are coming today. And that is no longer possible if you rely on this idea that you have to be the best thing that is out there for the world. So it definitely affects this idea. And I said I love the work of Bell Hooks, and she also says that it is really killing self love. This idea that you have to have this false sense, this image, this control.
Mm.
And remember, if we struggle, if we don't know how to love ourselves, it becomes hard to love others. And that's why oftentimes what we think is love is actually us just trying to be amazing in the lives of others or to be amazing for others. We do things for them or we try to impress them, but we're not really relating to them from a loving manner. And that starts with ourselves. We try to impress ourselves or we try to do things for us, create a life that we can be proud of, but we're not really relating with everything we are, including our fears, including our doubts, including our wounds, including the days and the things we don't like about ourselves. Definitely, it affects the relationship with ourselves.
Yeah. Julianne, let's talk about recovery, healing, growth. Um, how, firstly, what forms of therapy would be best designed to restructure our thinking? And I was asking this because I was thinking for a second around the context and the concept of the various, firstly, the various therapies you mentioned, but also just looking at cognitive behavioral therapy and maybe that being a solution. What's your take?
I'm not a specialist in CBT. For me, CBT is helpful to shape some perceptions and some narratives. But for me, the idea of main character syndrome, I think it needs to go a little bit deeper, because even though we might have self-confidence that we think, yeah, I'm doing great things, I think we need to come back and have self-worth and say, even if I'm not doing anything great today, I'm still worthy. And when you ask which form of therapy, I was actually thinking, I think group therapy. I mean, I love the work of Bell Hooks. She says healing is in community, because I think what we need to realize again is that people will not love you for you impressing them. People will love you for you connecting with them, for seeing them, for really being in the world with them. So I think a lot can actually happen when we are together and we practice healthy relationships again. But that can also start in individual therapy, because, like you said, with self love, we can start with the relationship with ourselves. And I think what is good is all forms of therapy that dig a little bit deeper and go into those underlying beliefs. Why do you think you're only good enough if you have something to offer? We have to learn again that we're good enough just by who we are, and also sit throughout the hard times, but also sit with the notion that you matter. And that's what I always ask people in therapy, what would you wish for a person you love? And you wouldn't wish for them that they have to push themselves and they have to be perfect and they have to impress others and they have to be on center stage with all spotlights on them. No, you actually just wish that they are okay, that they feel good, that they are enjoying life. And then we bring that back to ourselves and say, let's also wish that for ourselves. And yes, we still want to grow. We still want to take steps and be someone, but not from a place of pressure, but from a place of desire. So I think just try a healthy combination of group therapy, relational therapy, and also therapy that goes back to the underlying beliefs. But a lot of therapists incorporate it. If they use CBT or analysis or systemic therapy, a lot of us work with those beliefs we carry from childhood.
Julianne, as we sum up this conversation, I sort of want to come back to the context of this individual. This individual is surrounded by people, be it friends,
Yeah.
family, colleagues. How do those people participate in their recovery process? Which is very interesting because maybe 90% of us need to go through this entire process. But for the context sake, as a friend, a loved one, a colleague, how do you assist in somebody who, if you will, suffers from MCS?
That's a really good question. Because the question is, can you just wake up and say tomorrow, hey, please change, if the person hasn't given you a mandate to do so? I find it really, for me, that's a real struggle. Like I was like, my friend also said the other day when I was complaining about another friendship, and she said, why don't you just tell them? I'm like, I can't just wake up in the morning and say, I don't agree with how you do things, can I? But I think what we can do is just to be honest and say, you know what, in this friendship, in this relationship, something is missing for me at the moment. And just I give you an example. I had a time where I was really working a lot and I was really ambitious, and I always carried my laptop with me, even on holidays and trips with my friends.
Yeah.
And a lot of people would complain and say, no, you're burning out, you're working too much. And I was always like, no, leave me in peace. I'm not burning out. Who are you to tell me that? And my one friend sat me down and said, Julian, if you do that, I don't feel seen. I don't feel like you value the holiday. I don't feel like you want to be here with us. And I'm asking you to reflect on that and to leave the laptop at home. And it really, that hit me. And I said, okay, I'm leaving it at home. Cracked a joke. I was like, are you going to compensate me for the work? But inside, I was like, whoa, this
Yeah.
really hit me, because
Yeah.
she showed herself with her feelings. She was vulnerable in the conversation and she expressed the need. And I didn't carry my laptop when I'm with her ever since. And that really encouraged me to change, not because she put extra pressure on me or made me wrong or said I'm a problem and I'm going to burn out, but because she showed me that I matter to her by being present and being in a friendship. And that matters to me. And that's what I wanted to change. And I hope I did. I hope you're not going to call her and check. But I think it's that. Show
Yeah.
yourself and your need and hope that the other person wants to respond to it.
Wow. Julianne, it has been a pleasure speaking to you. For those who are looking to access some of your services, they're thinking to themselves, listen, I don't know where I stand. Because the reality is that there's so many fine lines with these kinds of concepts that sometimes it's good to just get a sense of where you are. And I know that you can offer that service range. Where do they get a hold of you?
Yes, definitely. So I'm on Instagram, with underscore Julienne. You can visit my website, www.reflectwithjulienne.com. We also have beautiful retreats where we come together with other people and do the work together, which I really believe in. And we have therapeutic retreats that focus on grounding ourselves and believing in ourselves again, which I think is a beautiful approach when you feel that pressure to turn yourself into a project or to be perfect or to impress others and have a narrative. Rather come and believe in yourself again with that calm sense. But obviously, yeah, you can also visit us at our farm at our retreats or in my office where I'm practicing in Santon.
The voice of none other than psychology therapist and coach Julie Ann joining us this evening. The conversation that was tabled, main character energy. And in actual fact, not energy, syndrome is what we were looking at. And if you are not familiar, it is a pop psychology term that may sound playful but hides serious questions about identity, emotional maturity, and the digital shaping of our minds. Something that was really profound that Julianne said was that it isn't necessarily ours to rid ourselves of the concept, but more so to understand what is required, the need for connection, the need for love, the need for attention are some of the underpinning issues that would lead you to that context. And the catch 22 that I thought was rather profound is that the more you do get into this performative state where you are the main character, where everything is about you, the less attached, the less loved, the less seen, the less heard you feel. I'd love to hear your thoughts and views. What's your take on character, or rather main character syndrome? Find us on YouTube. I'm going to urge you to head over to YouTube. We're currently streaming live. Channel Africa is a platform you need to be looking for, and you should see a pink highlight over the I'm going to say profile picture because, for the lack of a better word, I haven't been finding one. The profile picture of the channel. You're going to see a pink highlight with that little sign that we are live. Click on that and come and let's have a conversation about main character syndrome. For now, it is 33 after 11 p.m. Central African time. Let's get some music.